Aneta Zdun and Marcin Zdun got married in 2001. Together they went on to have 3 children. Aneta trained in physiotherapy and came to England in 2008. Marcin and their only daughter at the time, Nikoleta, joined Aneta a few months later. While in England, Aneta got work as a physiotherapist, and then she had a few more career jumps before settling as a carer. It's said that she was a devoted mom to all 3 of her daughters. By 2020, Nikoleta was 18-year-old, and she was studying travel and tourism at a local college. She was close to her mom and loved her 2 younger sisters very dearly. In all, they were a good family unit, at least where Aneta and her 3 daughters were involved. Since the early days of Marcin and Aneta's marriage, there had been times where Marcin had been jealous, possessive, and controlling. He often suspected Aneta was cheating, and despite there practically being no evidence whatsoever, he wouldn't believe her when she denied it. He demanded to know where she was going and who she was talking to. He criticised her for failing to keep the house tidy and to cook dinner for the family. In fact, he even went to the extent of uploading videos of the untidiness to Facebook, and he also uploaded pictures of mouldy soup in the fridge, just to show other people that he weren't lying, which in its own merit is quite an abusive and humiliating thing to do. He also made it clear that he thought Aneta was spending too much money. In all, Aneta not matching his bigoted version of how a wife should be, that would make him really angry. For the record, I think she was working at this point 3 days a week as a carer, and Marcin was working night shifts at Tesco's. His abuse went way further than that level though. He did things like disconnect a battery from a car so that she had to walk to meet clients, and she had to walk the children to school in the rain. And his anger and frustration wasn't only directed at Aneta. Nikoleta would also be on the receiving end of Marcin's anger and frustration, especially as she grew up into a young woman. His paranoia, fueled by his insecurities, would lead him to think that his wife and his daughter were laughing at him behind his back. They were ganging up on him. As early as June 2018, he wrote a statement, basically saying that he was being harassed and abused in his own home by them. As early as June 2018, he wrote a statement, basically saying that he was being harassed and abused in his own home, which is quite rich. In this statement, he also said that Aneta's and Nikoleta's financial statements, their incomes and their outgoings, should be checked for deception. This statement was written in the form of one of them notes that people write before they unalive themselves. The note was his way of blaming his wife and his daughter. And let's bear in mind, his daughter Nikoleta was only 16-year-old at that time. One of the occasions that Marcin was violent towards them was on the 3rd of April 2020. It came about because again he thought they were laughing behind his back, laughing at him. Marcin would tell you, as he did others, that the violence wasn't that serious. I mean, all violence is serious, unless it's self-defense, especially in the home. But his wife told a friend that during that incident, he strangled her until she was blue. And during that incident, Nikoleta intervened to try and protect her mom, but he threw Nikoleta to the floor. But that incident is pretty much where they started to draw the line. They teamed up on him and insisted that Marcin had to leave the house. He had to get out. They practically kicked him out. And he was worried that they were going to phone the police about him being abusive. So they made a deal. Aneta said, look, if you leave, if you get out now, we won't phone the police. And if he had phoned the police, he was worried that he'd get deported. So he agreed, and he left the house and went to live somewhere else. But this wasn't the first time that he'd been physically abusive to the family. Aneta had even told her mom that Marcin had hit her and Nikoleta until they were black and blue. Her dad is also witness to claims that at the beginning of the year, Marcin had threatened to kill them all. Before Marcin had been kicked out, it was already very clear that their relationship was irretrievably broken. They were sleeping in different rooms. Aneta was withdrawn and unhappy. Nikoleta was terrified of him, and she'd even stopped eating. So it started to dawn on Marcin that he'd ruined his family. So himself started to become withdrawn and depressed. He started spending more time in his room, drinking alcohol. He was easily becoming angry at both Aneta and Nikoleta. It's said that a part of the reason behind his anger was that he'd started to believe Aneta was having an affair with a man who worked with him at Tesco. Even more deluded than that, not only did he think Nikoleta were helping cover up for her mom, but he also believed that she was also sleeping with the same man. Now, you're thinking, well, there's got to have been something that made him think that. Well, he thought they were. In Marcin's words, the way he was looking at me, the piercing look and anger in his eyes. And he also said his wife and daughter were walking sore, and I saw them taking painkillers. I've got absolutely no words for that. That's putting 1 and 1 together to make 154. But he also believed that this guy, his colleague, had put a bug on his phone with the help of a friend. But let's face it, we know what abusive people are like. We've watched enough of these cases. The real and main reason behind his anger wasn't because he thought his wife was cheating. He was always accusing her of that. The main source of his anger was the fact that he was losing control of his family. And that's what every controlling, abusive, possessive person fears the most. And with that in mind, it's quite clear then that after he'd been thrown out of the family home in April 2020, these feelings only intensified. His family were carrying on and they were seemingly happier, so that only made it worse. There were talks of separation and divorce, but he said that it wasn't until Friday the 29th of May 2020 that it became abundantly clear to Marcin that their relationship was definitely over. For the next 2 days he drank even heavier, festering away in his own self-pity, until the 1st of June, which is celebrated in Poland as Dzień Dziecka. And with that, let's do the disclaimers. This is a true crime story. It's a true crime case. It involves real people. Them real people have families. So although I don't want you to comment and I don't want you to share, please do so with sensitivity. Dzień Dziecka, translated into English, is literally Children's Day. It's a day in which it's traditional to give presents to children. It was on this day in 2020 that Marcin woke up with an hangover. He said to take the edge off, he had a few more beers. And then in the early afternoon, he went from where he was living on Rowlands Road in Salisbury, England, and walked for about an hour to the family home at 23 Wessex Road. That's over about 3 miles away. He arrived at 20 to 3 in the afternoon. Aneta was there with all 3 of their daughters. At this point, Aneta is 40-year-old, Nikoleta is 18, and their 2 other daughters were 6 and 5. Oh, and Marcin is 39-year-old. It was only minutes after arriving that Marcin and Aneta started to argue. It was only a short argument, lasting only a few minutes. Marcin then got a knife from within the house and stabbed Aneta many times. When he first stabbed her, she was in the bathroom, but he proceeded to stab her all over the house as she was trying to get away from him. At some point, Nikoleta also got injured by the knife, although it's thought that she got injured when she was trying to protect her mom. Both Aneta and Nikoleta tried to escape, and they did manage to get out of the house. Nikoleta first, and then her mom. They got into the side passageway of the house. At this point, as you could imagine, both covered in blood from the wounds. But Marcin was still following them. He was still trying to attack them. As they tried to escape, the attack spilled out onto the street. Marcin stabbed and slashed Aneta. She placed herself in front of Nikoleta in an attempt to try and defend her. However, Marcin persisted, and he did stab Nikoleta slowly and deliberately in the chest. He grabbed Aneta by the hair, and he sliced her throat 3 times. During the attack, he was heard saying "Kiowa" to both Aneta and Nikoleta, which translated to English is whore in Polish. And let's not forget, while all of this is happening, the 2 youngest daughters were in full view of this entire attack, and they were screaming in terror. Their screams were so loud, they were heard from neighbours that were quite a distance away. They also pleaded with her dad to stop, but he just ignored them. And because they were screaming so loud, several men did come to see what the screams were. By doing so, they also witnessed the attack outside. Marcin then left Aneta and Nikoleta on the ground to die. He went and got his backpack from in the house, and while in the house, he also tried to wash some of the blood off his hands. And then he just went outside and casually walked off, like nothing had happened. But obviously there's witnesses, and 3 of the men that had witnessed the attack started following him. They challenged him, and as they're doing so, he's picking up more pace until he starts running. These men do chase him down, and they do manage to stop him. Forgive me if I get the pronunciation of his first name wrong, but the 3 men were Mr. Olatund, Gary and David. Another man called Jeff tried to save Aneta and Nikoleta. The police and paramedics also tried their best when they arrived, but there wasn't anything that anybody could have done. Aneta Zdun and Nikoleta Zdun both died from catastrophic blood loss. When Marcin was arrested, he was covered head to toe in bloodstains, but he seemed really calm. And it wasn't only the 4 men and Aneta that had acted in a selfless way. Nikoleta told the men take my sisters, save them. And if you're wondering, yeah, during the attack, David passed the children over a chain link fence to a lady called Janet. She took them into the house and kept them safe. In the aftermath of the attack, these two girls have got nowhere to go, not until the grandparents arrive. So Nick and Janet order him a Domino's pizza and they watch cartoons on Nickelodeon. But back outside in the moment, Nikoleta also asked Jeff, the man giving her first aid, to help her mom. Unbeknown to her, it was already too late. A bit of information that absolutely crushes my heart is during the court, they were shown a recording from a neighbour's CCTV. And it turns out during the attack, the girls can be heard crying out, "Daddy, I don't want mommy to die." So there's at least 7 absolutely incredible people, including Aneta and Nikoleta. All of these people, in the moment of need, acted selflessly. Even Nikoleta and Aneta were trying to protect each other before themselves. There's 2 sisters that have had their entire worlds shattered from beneath them. And then there's Marcin. Marcin didn't deny murder. Obviously he couldn't. There's that many witnesses. It weren't possible for him to deny it. So he went with the second most cowardly approach. He said he couldn't remember doing it. Oh, and let's not forget, everybody's ace card. The diminished responsibility. Not being able to remember what happened was one of the things that the judge highlighted. He refused it, pointing out that actually, when he was detained and arrested, you never asked why. Blood tests from after he'd been arrested showed that his alcohol level was twice the drink drive limit. So, while he's claiming that he only had a few beers, the judge outright rejected that as well. Marcin's defence were based entirely around his mental state. He couldn't remember. He had abnormality of the mind, aka diminished responsibility. Oh, and a psychiatrist said he had delusional disorder. But that wasn't considered to be a significant mitigating factor, so that was pretty much a waste of everybody's time. During the trial at Winchester Crown Court, Marcin consistently sought to minimise his domestic abuse. When the prosecution said, she told her mother she had photos, enough to get you a 15-year sentence, Marcin replied, I don't know what she was talking about. I never hit her. Then, when the prosecution suggested that Marcin had bullied his wife for many of their marriage years, he said, I didn't even have a time to bully her. I was working all the time. Another line from the prosecution, which speaks for itself, says, Why are you smiling, Mr. Zdun? You have smiled several times while giving evidence today and yesterday. Do you find this amusing? The thing I think is really interesting about Marcin's delusional, paranoid mindset is he actually told people what he was thinking. And in my experience of doing these cases and just knowing people, it's not that common for the person or the perpetrator to go around telling people their thoughts. They usually leave it in the mind, let it fester, let it grow, let it get worse. The court was shown a text from weeks before the killing in which Marcin told his brother-in-law, I guess he's fucking them both, because they were walking around sore and smiling. In another message shown to the court, it was talking about the attack which led to him being kicked out. I don't know who he sent it to, but he put, I fucking wiped her around the floor. It weren't only his messages that was held against him in court though. The court was also shown a message that Aneta had sent to her mom just days before a murder. It said, I don't want him to kill us. He's a psycho. David is one of the people who witnessed the attack and tried to help. And he cried in court, saying that there was nothing he could have done to stop the attack or help the victims. But he did punch Marcin. And another heartbreaker. One of the sisters told the court, my sister is injured. Daddy had a big knife and he kept poking her with it because of the accident. But it wasn't really an accident. He did it on purpose. There was so much blood in the bathroom. My dad called my sister and my mom into the bathroom and then started poking their necks. Dad pushed them into the bathtub and they were bleeding. Daddy kept poking Mommy with a big, very sharp knife. He'd done it lots of times to Mommy and Nikoleta. There was a lot of blood in the bath and on the boxes outside. I opened the bathroom door and Dad put the knife to me. I thought he was going to poke me with it, but he didn't. The jury were asked to consider 4 things while trying to reach a verdict. These were, was the defendant suffering from abnormality of mental functioning? Did the abnormality of mental functioning arise from a recognised medical condition? Did abnormality of mental functioning substantially impair the defendant's ability to A, understand the nature of his conduct, and or B, form rational judgment, and or C, to exercise self-control? The 4th thing was, did abnormality of mental functioning cause, or was it a significant contributory factor in causing the defendant to kill Aneta or Nikoleta? In the end, the jury rejected Marcin's claim of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and unanimously found him guilty of murder. It's uncertain whether Marcin had intended to kill his wife and daughter when he went to their house that day, but it is quite a big sticking point because he did take a lock knife with him, but that knife wasn't used in the murders. His passport were in his bag. Again, this could be premeditation. Maybe he was planning on leaving the country, but it's thought that his passport was still in his bag from his last trip to Poland because the other documents was also in his bag. He also had a lot of money with him, just under £1,000. But again, his bank statements show that that were an ordinary amount for him to withdraw from his bank just after payday, and he didn't empty his account. So without being able to say with certainty that he had the intention to kill him before he left for their house that day, the judge sentenced him on the basis that his intention to kill was due to anger in the moment after he'd arrived at the house. And because of a lack of premeditation, a whole life sentence wasn't applicable. However, it was a double murder, so the starting point for his minimum term for his life sentence was 30 years. As I've already said, Marcin's mental state was considered as a mitigating factor, but as I've also said, it wasn't classed as that serious. It didn't massively reduce his culpability, so although it was a mitigating factor, it weren't really that heavily factored. His only other mitigating factor was the fact that he had no previous convictions. But again, in light of how serious this case was, it didn't make that much of a difference. The aggravating factors of his case was a knife was used to create a large number of injuries to both victims. It happened at the victim's home. It was a betrayal of his position of trust in regards to the fact that he was the father. The distress and fear caused to each victim in the way that they both knew the other one was being attacked. The location and the time of the attack being on a residential street in the middle of the day. His false claim of amnesia to avoid responsibility, and the fact that his daughters witnessed the murders. With that being said, Marcin Zdun was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 34 years. I've now got 3 short statements to read for you, so let's get on with that. The first one is Wessex Care, who Aneta used to work for. They issued a statement about a beloved colleague and friend, saying that she was well loved and well known. The statement said, "Those of you who knew Aneta personally and professionally will know what a warm, kind and caring individual she was. She cared immensely for vulnerable people throughout her career as a physiotherapist and healthcare assistant. She will be greatly missed and mourned by all who knew her." Her mom and Nikoleta's grandmother said, "This is a huge tragedy. Nobody can bring back Aneta and Nikoleta, but now it will be easier for us to live. June 1st was a day evil won, which caused cruel death to the person closest to my heart. I will never again get to talk to my wonderful, clever, smiling, warm and good daughter. Nikoleta was the apple of my eye. I will never again see or hug my granddaughter. Pain sears through my heart and mind in a way that I'm not able to put into words." Aneta's dad said, "She was clever, tough and capable. Blood of my blood. She was my reflection. I was so proud of her." And then of Nikoleta, he said, "Nikoleta to me was an exceptional person. She had a whole life ahead of her." That's all I've got for you. First of all, I'd like to apologise if this content isn't up to par. I've got a cold, I'm boiling hot. Even speaking is absolutely burning the back of my throat. But this case, it's the same thing we see over and over again. But as I said before, this one were different, weren't it? Because Marcin did actually tell somebody about his delusional thoughts. His brother-in-law, nonetheless. I'm not sure, by the way, whether that were Aneta's brother or not. And I'm not blaming him, but in my opinion, it's your job as a listening ear to put some rationality into a conversation. It's your job to say, wait, you think they're both on it with the same guy? Are you sure? That sounds really weird and extreme to me. I mean, that could make a big difference. Don't get me wrong, it could then be a level of paranoid where he thinks you're crazy as well, or you're in it as well. But it could make a big difference. And I don't know if this guy replied to that, it might have, but the way the message was conveyed, it sounded like it was part of the conversation. Advice is always so much easier in hindsight, but you now have the benefit of hindsight. From all of these cases that we've covered, by now you should have it in your head. Do not take chances with an abusive person. By admission, in the way of a text to her mom, she said that she knew that Marcin was dangerous. She said that he was psycho and that she was scared of him. At that point, she should have phoned the police. Obviously, I'm not blaming her for it. This is the same old tale that we hear again and again. And I understand why she didn't phone the police. But as I said, you now have the hindsight of this. Don't fall into the trap of protecting the kids. Their relationship with a dad. Don't protect that. Marcin has already subjected one of his daughters to this abuse. But even if he hadn't, still don't fall into the trap of thinking that he won't. And certainly never put their relationship with a dad above your safety. As I said the other day, a toxic mouth will poison the water supply. It's a quote that I found myself, I think I've created it, but it's a quote that I've started using more and more. Do you really want such a horrible person around your children, with their toxicity poisoning their lives, poisoning their minds? Of course, in situations like this, the law itself is a big problem. The system is a big problem. It doesn't do enough. But don't think you can't escape, because people have, people do. Don't think just because the relationship's over and he's moved out that you're safe. That's not how this works. You need to report it. Report every incident, save every text. And just as importantly, don't think you're alone. There are so many people, too many people, in this situation. And to the abusive people out there, the men and the women, I believe fully in my heart of hearts that you know, even after an incident, it clicks in your head that you know you was abusive. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. In that case, walk away. If you can't stop yourself from being like that, doing them things, saying them things, walk away. You do not, I'll say it every video like this, you do not own your partner. If you do not like your relationship, if you don't like the way your partner's been, the way your children have been, or anything else, walk away. Now, I'm not saying you can just walk away from your kids, but if you're abusive, you can. If you're abusive, you should. Or at least go to help. I know from doing past videos like this that there is counselling sessions for abusive people, where they can learn to control that mindset, change that mindset, and become a better, more caring, less abusive partner. Now, I know that I sound so self-righteous right now. I'm not perfect. I'm not trying to portray I am. But this advice needs saying, because there is so many people in this situation right now. There's so many people that every day witness things and don't do anything about it. As always, there is links in the description for websites and stuff like that, information that you can visit. There is actual proper professional information rather than just listening to some YouTuber rant on. And with that, all I'm saying is, I love you. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. And I'll see you next week.